Hello and welcome to this webinar. This is Shane McGlynn of IRM UK, and today I'm joined by Michael McMurrow, who will be presenting on data quality by design and by default, model GDPR concepts for data protection. Michael will be presenting a session on this topic at our MDM and Data Governance Conference 2020, which takes place in London from the 2nd to the 5th of November. We welcome your questions via the questions pane. And now over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Shane, and thanks to everybody for signing in. And first and foremost, I want to hope that you're all well, that you're all surviving these funny times. I'm talking to you from a back bedroom in Dublin, Ireland. As you can see, I'm having fun with my lockdown beard at the moment, mainly to annoy the kids, but it's keeping me amused while I'm at it anyway. So I'm going to talk today about the topic that Shane just described there, data quality by design and default, and how this can benefit from leveraging activities happened under GDPR. And why this topic? Most of the work I've been doing over the last couple of years seems to be focusing mainly on two organizational challenges in the data space. Data protection, obviously GDPR a couple of years ago and since then, and really significantly data quality. Data quality is a major hot topic in the clients I've been dealing with, primarily in financial services. And it's also a very hot topic from the point of view of regulators in that space. It's one of the main things they're focusing in on within our organizations is data quality, as they have been doing with data protection. So it set me thinking, are there similarities? Are there something that these two topics, quality and protection, can work together on or can benefit each other from, or best practices can emerge from one into the other? So that's the genesis of this talk. It's just really a summary. I will be going into a lot more detail on the specifics later on in the year, but this is a kind of a teaser into it, or just to get your thoughts going about looking for synergies between these two topics. So I'm going to go on to slide 2 now. Not alone are there sort of general overlaps, there's actually very quite specific overlaps between data protection and data quality. There is a Venn diagram and there's a sweet spot in the middle where data protection, this is a quote from GDPR, is one of the principles is that data of living persons shall be accurate, up to date and fit for purpose, which clearly is data quality. So there is a hard overlap there. They both have their own areas as well aside from that, but there is a common point to focus on. But at a more general level, what's common about those two topics in my head are, first of all, they're both weak within our organizations, certainly the ones that I've been exposed to and working with. They're areas of weakness. And the very particular thing that they both have in common is they both require the whole organization to do things. They have to be cultural. It's not like the data protection team can do all that or the data quality team can do all that. Everybody across the organization has skin in the game, has a role to play, has a responsibility. And again, any of us who've been around data governance or data management for quite a long while will all say, I'm sure, that tends to be the hardest thing to land around data governance. It's how to make things cultural, how to get everybody to see that they've a contribution to make, that they're involved in this process. So coming from the position of them both having those two main characteristics in common, and also having a hard overlap on, to some extent, it's had me thinking about how one can learn from the other in particular. And I'll come to a couple of main points about that in a few slides' time. I'll just go on to slide 3 now, just to set some context of data quality. So just pop to slide 3, if that's okay. You know all this already, but data quality, why are we focusing on data quality as a hot topic? Well, for various reasons. One, that inadequate data quality has big downsides. And again, you'll all understand this, so I'm not going to labor on this point, but clearly bad data quality, poor data quality, deficient data quality have downsides. Regulatory penalties, obviously, brand damage, obviously, and lots of inefficiencies. Either handling or walking around or managing to fix and adjust data quality, bad data quality, or inability to use data for things we want to use it for, like moving forward into the offensive things like AI and such like. We need good data for that. So there are there's big downside to bad data quality. That's a standard triangle that's used frequently to show the difference between cost of trying to bring of preventing bad data quality at start might be $1, fixing it calmly afterwards might be $10, and fixing it when there's a fire, like a regulatory demand, be $100. It's massive, massive cost, or data debt, as John Ladley likes to call it. Very nice phrase, that you're building up data debt with bad data quality. So it costs money. And there's loads and loads of examples of, if you just Google anything, you'll find examples from Gartner or Forrester or anybody describing the real bottom line cost to the organization of poor data quality, either cost in doing things or cost in or lost opportunity in not being able to use data. So that's, again, you all know that if you're on this conference. I'm guessing you're conscious of data quality being such a real thing and such a downside to businesses. I'll move on to slide 4, which is a bit more of the same. It's just a couple of examples. Again, you can get these everywhere you want to get there. If you want to influence people in your organization and emphasize to them the implications of bad data quality, these are the sort of things you can quote. There's quite nice research done in Irish University in 2017, coming up with some, again, very stark numbers. So data quality, we know, is a problem. Data quality has big downsides, and regulators are increasingly pushy and looking for evidence of activity, proactive activity, to improve data quality. So moving on now to slide 5. This is the first of the GDPR intersection points. So on to slide, on slide 5. So one of the key mandatory bits of GDPR, of data protection, which is in the law, is the demand that data protection is seen as something that's done by design and by default. It's not something you do after the fact or something that you react to. You've got to get that into your thinking, into your change thinking. You've got to build data protection into your organization, into your systems, and into your processes. So it's a demand of that regulation. And that's why I've come up with the phrase data quality by design and default, because it's exactly the same thing. To get data quality into the DNA of the organization, into just the way we do things, into the mindset, and building it into change. Now, at this point in time still, GDPR should be in the organizational memory. It was a big ticket item 2 years ago. It should still be a big ticket item, and I'm not sure in the organizations you're in whether it stayed as big ticket as it should be, or whether it's drifted into the background a bit. But this idea of data protection by design default should be part of your organizational DNA now. If not, you're going to fail GDPR, because the regulator will be coming in, if they want to do an inspection or if they're following up on a breach, they'll be looking for evidence that the organization is actually living this with regard to data protection. So the phrase data protection by design and default should be a phrase which is alive in the heads of the people in your organization, everybody across the organization. So what I'm suggesting is that if that phrase is a hot phrase, it is a real phrase, then let's leverage that and use the same model of phrase to focus on data quality. So to bring in the phrase data quality by design and default, and to bring that into your change management processes alongside the data protection by design and default steps in your change process similarly. So the fact that one phrase is mirroring the other adds power to both, and it definitely should be able to capture the mindset and clarify that these are very similar things, and they're both demanding the same similar things, which is you do this by design, you build things in, you plan, you anticipate, you don't just react. So this sense of getting the cultural mindset around these two phrases together, I think, adds power to both. So moving on to the next slide, slide 6, what do we mean by design? Well, data quality by design, it is becoming a real thing. It is a real thing. It's not just becoming, it is a real thing. Because again, in certain industries, and I'm talking mainly about financial services here, banking and insurance have been two of my more recent bigger clients, the regulations in that space are very explicit. They're not just saying data quality is a good thing or let's do data quality. They're actually laying out specifically what they want in some cases. So on the very small font on the right-hand side, I've cut and pasted from an ECB report on credit modeling. And they specifically describe what they're expecting to see in the data quality framework of an organization. It's not loose, it's not woolly, it's not vague, it's quite specific. It's very specific. They're laying out the components that they expect to see, the evidence they expect to see being gathered. the sort of metrics, the sort of depth of metrics that they're expecting to see around data quality. And you only will get these if you design them in. These won't happen by accident. These won't happen after the fact. You've got to build these into your processes, build these into your data ownership governance model. These sort of metrics are demanded, okay? And as it happens, those metrics, there's 8 of them listed out there. 6 of them are what's, in my experience, has become the industry norm now around the 6 dimensions of data quality, which have been documented very well by DAMA UK a number of years ago. And you're probably all familiar with those dimensions: completeness, uniqueness, validity, accuracy, etc. So those 6 dimensions, which is a way of breaking data quality down, to saying, get below the phrase, what do you mean by it? Do you mean that is data missing? Is data inaccurate? Is data inconsistent? Is data unique or non-unique when it should be unique or non-unique? Is it random enough? All those sort of examples, sort of characteristics of data quality, to break down the word into 6 different dimensions. The ECB information on the right-hand side of the screen calls out 2 more, which is traceability and what's the other one? Traceability and availability. So coming from this position of saying that the expectation, the demand of regulators, in particular around data quality, is demanding something very specific. It's demanding that you can show evidence that you're that you're monitoring and measuring your critical data in this depth to 6, or in their case 8 dimensions, and that when they walk in and they say, show us the figures, show us the data you use to calculate that maybe risk-weighted asset figure, or to drive a particular predictive model or whatever, show us the evidence. They want this sort of evidence, which you only get by designing it in. Okay, so that's one aspect of design that you've got to make sure now becomes harder, because you can't get this after the fact. And then moving on to slide 7, data quality by design. Also, there's 2 different aspects. There's always loads of different aspects, but I'm picking on 2 here, which is when you're designing data quality evidence, or the gathering of data quality evidence, or policing of data quality, you do it in 2 ways. One, you do it as part of operational functions, changes, things that are going on, processes and systems that are running. So there should be data quality controls built into there, designed into there. And those sort of controls might be things like design in data, more forensic validation of data as being entered in system, like comparing data across other data items, or standardizing on drop downs rather than having free text, or whatever it happens to be. So energy to validate data on the way in and prevent bad data coming in, controls around that. Or then within systems, controls as data move through systems, that they don't get dropped. That's pretty standard IT controls. Often data doesn't just disappear down black holes, that the solution does carry all the data through, and there's reconciliations and checkpoints along the way. Or there could be comparisons between data within the system with other data, maybe within the system or outside the system as well, for sort of reasonableness checks or along the way. But you're building these into systems, and not something that's kind of been done as an afterthought. They're designed into the systems, designed into the processes, and they hopefully will achieve an improvement in data being gathered, and certainty of data as it moves through transformation steps through processes and systems. So they're built in, they're designed into changes, designed into systems and processes. And then the second set of data quality focus is around data quality assurance, which is looking for things maybe after the fact, or looking at data as a set, look for maybe unusual trends or outlying values or suspicious correlations that wouldn't necessarily get captured on the run at operational time, but afterwards, after the fact, data as a set can be analyzed to look for unusual things, as I mentioned, like suspicious correlations or outlying values, or suspiciously popular values. Like, for instance, it's okay for anybody to be born in the first, but it'd be slightly suspicious if 10% of your customers are born in the first. Like, anyone is perfectly entitled to be born in the first, but not 10%. So that sort of assurance world of how to look for exceptions, look for outliers, analytic-y sort of stuff, drilling off dashboards, running RAG statuses, that kind of stuff. That's called, that in my head, I call those assurances. So again, these have to be designed in, these have to be built in, these have to be thought through and asked for and designed as part of the natural way of doing things. I'll move on to the next slide, slide 8. And this is where I'm talking about leveraging the same data protection mentality, the same data protection artifacts within change, and doing the same for data quality. So again, if you're involved in GDPR at all, or even involved in change at all, you'll be aware of the fact that there's a mandatory artifact which has to be gathered during change programs called DQIA, or Data Protection Impact Assessment. And this is demanded by the regulation, data protection regulation, if any change has the potential to add significant risk, or to either introduce or increase significant risk to data subjects on their use of personal data and the processing of personal data. So if you're doing a change program and it happens to involve personal data, and there's any chance at all that the change itself, either the nature of the processing or the architecture of the solution in some way introduces some potential risk to the data subjects, you have to record a document called DQIA. It's not an option, it's mandatory under Article 35. Okay, so every formal change methodology in your organizations should have this step, must have this step. If not, you better do it fairly fast, because if you do get a visit from the ICO or whatever regulator you happen to have, if they come in and they see your change process isn't prodding, demanding a DQIA, then you will, without any doubt, you'll receive a nasty surprise. Okay. So the idea of a DQIA must be in your organizational memory now, because if it isn't, your organization is in a fairly risky place. Okay, so any change agent, anybody going through change projects now knows the phrase DQIA. So I'm suggesting to leverage, from data quality point of view, another one called a DQIA, a data quality impact assessment. Exactly the same idea. Every change program should consider its role to play to improve or to police or to guard data quality within the organization. The quality impact assessment would say things like, what is this change doing? What is it going out of its way to do to try and ensure good data quality? So for instance, if it happens to be a system that's gathering data, I would expect the DQIA to show all the energy, activity, all the designed things that are helping to ensure the data gathered is accurate. Like I mentioned earlier on, using drop-down boxes rather than free text for things like country codes or currency codes, that's a given. Stuff like that, or more complicated business rules that are running through the change to verify and police data quality. For instance, there could be some numbers that should have some natural relationship, then build that into the change. Make sure that isn't just something that's left behind. Anything at all, any single thing at all that can be done to help to improve data quality as gathered, as transformed, or as presented, should be recorded in the DQIA to show that this was actively thought through and real energy was put into it. And again, over time, you can assess these DQIAs and see whether or not programs really are paying lip service to this, or whether people are actually trying to go out of their way to improve data quality. Bear in mind, the existing world we're in at the moment is weak. Whatever we're doing at the moment prior to this is leading to, again, from my experience, is leading to fairly ropey data quality across systems within organizations. So it's not like the world at the moment is perfect. It clearly isn't. Improvement is required. Extra thinking, extra energy is required. Systems and processes have to try harder. So the DQIA to me is a very strong artifact, a very strong mentality to bring to change. The demand that people do go out of their way to explicitly consider data quality and design things, more things and more things, and belts and braces and more things into change to try and raise the data quality bar. Okay. So again, as I keep mentioning, because DQIA is alive, it's real, people know it, leverage that and mirror it and do exactly the same thing for quality and call it a DQIA is my proposal or my suggestion. So moving on to the next slide, which is the last one, which is saying, which is a little couple of summaries, is that both of these things, data protection is weak, has been weak. Organizations, the evidence is there that organizations have struggled and sometimes can be quite sloppy with some of the data protection that they've been doing to date, either the processing of data, whether they should be doing it or not, and the security and everything around it. And the evidence of data quality is also currently weak. And that's certainly from my observation. Maybe it's different for the people on the webinar, but it's the biggest area of weakness I'm seeing and the biggest challenge I'm seeing. So we have these two boats. They can lift each other, let them rise each other, but they'll only rise if they're designed to rise together. As the second quote says, rising tide won't raise people who aren't in the boat in the first place. So let's get the boats aligned. Let's see ways in which either boat can reference the other. Get this cultural thinking going in a kind of a coordinated and consistent way, and hopefully they both will rise and help each other to rise together. So that's it from my point of view. Maybe really just a couple of points. One really big point: these things are kind of common. They're touching out the same problems. They share the same difficulties. So let's try and share the same language, the same mentalities, the same artifacts, the same approaches wherever possible. And with that, I'll open the floor to questions, which you can obviously send through to Shane. If we don't cover something here today, if either somebody thinks of a question afterwards, please feel free to fire me a LinkedIn. You'll find me a slightly shorter bearded version of me on LinkedIn, so I do look fairly similar. Other than that, I'm delighted to take some questions now and hope that I've at least teased the idea of let's try and get the cross benefit going between these two areas of data management.
Thank you, Michael. And yes, we have time for a few questions. First question, please. What aspects of data quality design have generally been the weakest in organizations that you've worked with?
I think it's a good question. I think it's the sense that change programs, the business people in change programs aren't really thinking of data quality. They don't really get it yet. And that's probably a general thing across data governance. Oftentimes business people don't really quite fully get that data is a thing and it's a business thing. And IT are focused typically on just engineering controls, like a million things go in to the left, a million things go out to the right, the simple things, or numbers are numbers, or all the simple things. Where data quality tends to get most toxic, I suppose, is where it's more subtle stuff. Like I mentioned, things like outlying values or overly popular values, or things that are more subtle, things that really are suspicions. So the quality focus has tended to be just on the simple stuff, on the engineering stuff, and things aren't falling off the side of the ship. And the business aren't really bringing their mentality to it, their thinking to it. Another aspect could be that sometimes the solutions get weakened by not a hard enough, rigorous stance around data quality. An example there might be for anything that's got any relational database type systems that are using relational data. You might say, for instance, that an account must belong to a customer. That'd be in a relational model, you'll have a mandatory relationship, one-to-many relationship between a customer and account, let's say. But let's say the business wants to do something. Well, what if, like, we want to open an account and the customer system is maybe it's down to me. I want to open the account anyway, and then come back and open the customer later. That kind of thing. So you start weakening things. So some hard data quality things like to do with relationships between data, which can be very significant, and orphan accounts are a real problem. Sometimes the change programs themselves haven't really, because they haven't been putting data quality front and foremost, they sometimes lead to some sort of tactical solutions or weakened solutions to allow for for instance, relational data to be data in relation systems being entered by making every relationship optional rather than making someone's mandatory, if that makes sense. Now that sounds quite technical as I'm saying it, but it's because the implications aren't made clear to the business, and they aren't strong enough. The implications of allowing these sort of weak chinks to happen and expect that data will kind of eventually catch up with itself in some way, that weakness, because data quality hasn't got a high enough front and central focus, let's say like a DQIA would force that some sort of sloppy weaknesses gather, and then you end up with a death by 1,000 cuts or death by 1,000 weaknesses, and suddenly the data is all over the place, and you've got orphans here and orphans there, and then you try and maybe change keys, all kinds of stuff can happen. So a harder focus and a harder determination around making sure the designs don't get weakened just because, what about this scenario? Let's just weaken it to allow us to do this thing on the, no, you can't. You've got to force things through a certain sequence.
Thank you. A few more questions, please, Michael. This question, thank you. What should be, according to you, the main sections of any DQIA document?
That's a really good question. The DQIA, there's two main sections. One is data the change is using. So this is a real example in a client I'm in at the moment, is that a change program assumed it was going to be, that data was just going to be grand. It was taking it as read, the data was going to be available to it, and the testing didn't actually surface it, and things went live, and suddenly the data wasn't up to it. But that was kind of a little bit too late in the day because it had gone live. So the data quality impact assessment to me would be data quality of the input data. So what are the expectations of data required by the change? What are the quality targets, the completion targets, whatever happens to be, and get that defined up front within the change. And then the impact assessment of that is, do we do profiling? How do we do testing? How are we going to drive that through all the way through so we can prove that the data is going to be actually able to service this change? So that's one side, is data dependencies. And then the other side of it is data that this change actually is gathering, manipulating, or in some ways is involved with. And then in that case, it would be designing the controls. What are the set of things we can build into the solution to police the data at entry or through its route? So that's designed in things, it's rules, it's probably some will be technical, but some will be business rules, like this number cannot be negative, that kind of thing. So to make sure those sort of rules are built in and stitched in, or defined and stitched into the change. And then finally, what other data quality assurances would we like to also sponsor as part of this change to provide a quality window onto the data which the change itself, the execution of the change itself can't do. So it'd be increasing the scope of the change for that. So there'd be the three things. The first would be data quality dependencies, and then obviously the data owner, or whatever governance model you have in place, the owners, stewards, or whatever, they need to be at that change, engaged in that change, so they're made aware of the fact that this change demands, let's say, that email addresses are 90% accurate. That could be a requirement for them, right? So the change requires email addresses to be 90% populated and accurate. The data owner, or whatever model you have in your organization that drives ownership or stewardship or whatever, that person needs to be aware of the fact that this change is demanding that, and the data owner has to, as part of the DQIA, provide assurance, provide confirmation the data is fit for that purpose, and then also profiling and testing will prove that through the process. So what was on there? So the first one is data dependencies, and the data owners and stewards will be involved in the change to confirm that the data is fit for those purposes. And then the actual change engineering design itself should be designing the controls it's building in as part of natural processing systems, and assurances they want to add to the scope of the project to provide further assurances.
Great, thank you, Michael. A few more questions, please. A few times organizations think about cost of DQ from a tech perspective. Considering that, what would be your advice for someone who wants to see the value of DQ without huge investments in tools?
Yeah, it doesn't tend to be particularly a tooling thing. And from my experience, it doesn't tend to be specifically a tooling thing. It tends to be more around the governance space, around the ownership and understanding of what quality we have, of somebody being accountable for within your governance framework, or again, ownership, stewardship, that kind of thing. If you're the owner of data, you must be able to know the quality of your data as it sits, and through various change programs, you've got to know the quality of data that's required. So those are things they're more like business things. There will be some profiling and tooling to be done around assessing the quality of data as it stands. But it doesn't tend to be the biggest cost. The biggest cost tends to be getting people to come to the table and do things, and see it as part of their business responsibility to do it. The data quality cost should, well, certainly the clients I've been in, they're very aware of data quality cost. They're aware of the complexity of satisfying regulatory demands in particular, where unfortunately they're doing that on the back foot because they're doing it reactively to regulators to say, let's say in particular regulation, you call out, we have 150 critical data elements that are contributing to this calculation or these calculations. They will come in and ask you for those data quality dimensional evidence, right? So it's not like you've any say in the matter, you've got to do it. And the organizations that I've been dealing with are very aware of the fact of how inefficient and how costly this is to try and do that retrospectively. So I think the cost model around regulations tends to be surfacing itself as saying how complex are our regulatory programs to be, and how much of that is focused on data quality, evidence gathering and metric gathering. And if that happens to be the project's costing 50 million and we're spending 30 million in that around the data quality space, there's a fair bit of visibility. Where it becomes more tricky is around the offensive stuff, around how are we being held back? How are we not able to do customer things? How are we not able to do robotics? Are not able to do AI or deep learning or whatever? So again, hopefully your analyst community will be able to show the downsides or the missed opportunity costs potentially. One client I'm working in has a robotics program, and they're able to show for instance, the lost cost opportunity of robotics not being able to go all the way through. So let's say the intention is to do a robotic process from left to right, but data quality stops it happening a third along the way, half the time. Okay, so the cost benefit of the robotics would be known, and then the failure to deploy the robotics comes out from the reality of the number of failed robotic attempts, if that makes sense. So there can be sometimes natural metrics that come out of the attempt to use data for offensive purposes. So there'd be, I suppose, the two main cost drivers. I hope I'm answering the question. Two main cost drivers would tend to be, what is the inefficiency cost around regulatory programs? And is that there should be a good proxy, if not an exact figure, a good proxy of how data quality how data quality activity is contributing to that cost, and it will be a large double-digit percentage. And then hopefully the offensive programs will have evidence of the lost opportunity costs that they're experiencing.
Great, thank you, Michael. And last question, please. You mentioned that data quality should mirror the GDPR approach, as this is now alive within organizations. From your experience, is this really the case in practice?
Yeah, that's a good one. And no, not enough. It depends on the clients. Some companies I'm with have kept it alive, and it is real. Some of them almost immediately on May the 26th, whatever it was, 2 years ago, down tools and didn't carry it through. So yes, in some companies I'm finding it disappointing when I go in, because I happen to have a lot of GDPR experience, and I do the GDPR training for the Institute of Banking here in Ireland. So I've kept myself in that zone, and certainly I'm seeing from doing either with clients or when I'm marking papers for students, it's surprisingly disappointing, surprisingly patchy is the way I'd put it. So I'd be very interested in your experiences, and if we get to meet or when we get to meet, hopefully post-lockdown in November, we can discuss that in reality. But no, some organizations I think are in a very weak spot. I wouldn't survive a deep investigation very quickly, very well, if they were to do a spot check of staff across the organization. Have you ever heard of GDPR, or do you know what a DQIA is, or yeah, some organizations are definitely haven't focused enough, but some have, and the ones who have are definitely already benefiting from it. You can see it. You can see the thinking is happening in change programs already. to its benefit, and near misses aren't happening because of that. But patchy, that to answer the question, I'd say patchy. And I'd be very interested in your observations from your own world, so whether it was a tick box 2 years ago or whether it's actually become a cultural norm.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Thanks to everyone who joined the webinar, and big thanks to you again, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye now.